So in this class today, we're looking at emotion, thinking, and critical thinking. And we'll talk about some of the dangers and negative aspects of emotion. They can cloud critical thinking, create biases. You can be less objective. And so if you're making a choice, buying a car, then emotion could lead you to make a less logical choice. In teaching, we need to consider emotions of teachers, emotions of students. And so if you feel annoyance and anger, it's good to acknowledge it, work with it, and then also be careful how it plays out. And so if the students are annoying one another, angry with one another, that can be a teachable moment. And the same with us as teachers. When we are feeling an emotion, journaling can be very useful in that can be a teachable moment. And certainly in many professions, teaching and nursing and others, they encourage you to journal each day or each week and write down about the more difficult experiences you have had and what they tell you. Emotions can also have very strong effects in that they can drive us. And so to be without emotion, so if someone meets a partner, meet a guy, meet a girl, and there is love and passion, then those emotions cause us to do incredible things, like launch out and buy an extra large coffee instead of a normal coffee for the other person, or something incredibly romantic like that. If you need further tips on romance, then later in the lesson, flowers, chocolates, all of those things. And maybe you can give me some tips as well. That would be good. And my partner and children might appreciate it. Let's begin by looking where we've got to. The Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. In that discussion, we moved from Plato and idealism to Aristotle and empirical measurement and a focus there. And then we moved on to modernity, where we have a rediscovery of the methods of Aristotle, perhaps to some extent. And certainly we have an emphasis today in modernity on objective reasoning, verifiable, empirical, measurable truths. And that's been quite a focus in the weeks of this course, where we've looked at verifying what can we see. Today, we're going to balance that a little bit by looking at feelings and emotion. And we can also look at those subjects that allow you to be more expressive of feeling and emotion, such as music or visual arts or drama, where you can actually be more involved with feeling and emotion. So the Bible, scripture, has many examples of roles of emotion, even in terms of the emotions of God and also of people. And when we read in the Psalms, and it's said to be good for us to read the Psalms, because they too give an opportunity for expression of emotion. And so we have Psalms of praise and thanksgiving, but we also have some other Psalms, such as, my enemy has annoyed me, oh God, dash them against the rocks, dash their children against the rocks, or whatever. And people saying this is not necessarily the will of God, but it's an opportunity to vent emotion. And so if your hand offends you, chop it off. Not something you necessarily have to do, but it's talking about ways of using metaphor to see and understand. So we're looking at emotion and intuition. And I'm reminded of Proverbs 16:32 that says, patience is better than power. Controlling one's temper is better than capturing a city. So when you're in a staff meeting in a school and another teacher annoys you, don't necessarily stand up and vent and say, that person's annoyed me, and etc. There are better ways to handle things. And again, probably chocolates and flowers might be a better way to go. So whoever is patient, whoever is slow at anger, whoever is able to understand and control their emotions is better, says Proverbs 32, than the strong and powerful. If you rule your own spirit, then he who rules his own spirit is stronger than someone who can conquer and rule a city. And the same is true of the students. One of the challenges between prep and year 1 through primary and secondary is to encourage people to develop understanding and rule over their emotions. Titus 2, 7-8. Show yourself in all respects a model of good works. In teaching, show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. So we're looking at emotion, intuition as a way of knowing, in contrast to the physical sciences, mathematics and science, and reasoning. Today we're looking more at the instinctive approaches. And so we've looked at reasoning, and then we've looked at language, and now we're looking at emotion as a field of knowledge in the arts, in particular, drama, but also a way of knowing about oneself and acknowledging, I feel this emotion. We're going to be looking at emotions in body language and facial expression, and study some of the background understandings to emotion. So if we were to say to someone, you're being emotional or you're being rational, which one is the more complementary of these two? A couple of hands up. Which one is the more complementary out of being emotional or rational? So Alex and then Martha, perhaps. Alex.
Probably being rational.
Right. Isn't that fascinating? And Alex, why in our Western society today, unless you come from certain countries as an immigrant, and Alex could tell us, I was thinking of Italians, but I shouldn't mention that because it might be Italian. But I've got friends who are Italian, and they can get very emotional, and some European countries can get very emotional. But Alex, why do we in our Western countries see the rational as, the more sensible? Yeah.
I think perhaps society tells us that when they relate relate emotions to vulnerability. And so I think when people are being rational, they just think they're able to control themselves more.
Yes, I think that's an important one. Self-control is the key thought there. And if you can rule over your own spirit, like Proverbs says, then there'll be other aspects of self-control that will be very valuable in the organisation of the classroom. Martha, which one is the more valued, being rational, being emotional, and why?
Look, in our world, definitely being rational is valued more, unfortunately.
Yes.
Because and even in Christian circles, it's the same. And I just think God created us with emotions for a reason. It is part of who we are, and we can express things and use emotions in a good way, in a positive way, like to worship God. We need emotion to be able to do that with all of our heart. And so I think there's a reason for them, and we wouldn't have emotions if we weren't meant to use them.
Yeah, so good. So there is a reason for them. Now, as Alex said, to say you're being emotional can imply a lack of self-control, and to say that you're rational can imply a high level of self-control. However, if you're on a football team, then it may be important to have emotion. Or if you're on a cheer leader team, then that may be a place for emotion. So there are certainly places for showing emotion. And as you've said very well, Martha, if God has made us with both reason and emotion, with a left hemisphere of a brain, right hemisphere of a brain, then they're there for a reason. Being emotional can imply lack of self-control, lack of self-understanding. And so one of the things that we should be working towards is emotional intelligence, whereby just as people have an understanding of reasoning, if they have an understanding of their emotions and other people's emotions, then that will be very valuable. Sometimes by being rational, we mean objective. That is, we can look at it, observe it, measure it, think it out, And being emotional is to be more subjective, that comes out of our inner being. But as a number of theologians have said, the subjective and the emotional should be just as valuable as the objective and the rational. And as Martha has said very well, there is a very important place for that. Maybe the problem is not that the objective and the rational is better than the emotional and the subjective. The problem is that we don't often develop the emotional and subjective in fully formed, well-developed ways as we do with the rational and the objective. Feelings can also be helpful as well. Have some slides now that we've put together on emotions. When you look at some faces, they will tell you something about emotions. And so let's have a look through some of the faces here. Anyone got any thoughts on that looks like perhaps anger, is it? And then Kieran, what's your thoughts on the first two or three?
She looks almost concerned.
Yeah, concerned, exactly. And that one, Kieran?
Repulsed.
Yeah. And this one?
Disgusted.
Yeah. And if we go down a page, what are your thoughts on these three here, Paige?
I think the first one's definitely like surprised.
Yeah, surprised.
Second one, it's so small on my screen, like happy.
Yes.
And then the third one just looks really upset.
Yes, yes. And Abby, your thoughts on these two at the top here?
I have no idea what that left one could be.
And this one?
I don't know. Kind of surprised, I guess. Yeah, that top one is really difficult. That one is kind of like, I don't know. That's hard.
And this one?
Oh, like that's extreme upset. I don't know. Babies can be everything, like anything though.
Everything
hard.
all at once. Gabriella, do you have any thoughts on these four?
My first thought of the guy is like he's mid-passionate argument or debate.
Yes,
so like
very passionate. Yeah,
passionate or something.
Yeah.
And then she looks perplexed. I don't know. She's just something's
it's a
going
bit harder,
on.
isn't it? And this one?
Content.
Yes.
I don't know. And that one's obviously the baby's either hungry.
Yeah. And they say that there are 8 basic emotions, and I think babies sort of have 2, don't they? So that happy and not happy. We need to remember that just as there's the red and the green, the 2 colors, people have different tendencies. And so some people are very calm. They have a genetic makeup that's very calm. Other people are very fiery. And also there are different levels of emotion. Some are like the leaves that are green and restful, and others are like the flower that suddenly emerges. An interesting diagram or categorization of 9 different emotional states says that there are 3 basic emotions. That is, there's the head thinking, rational person, and then there is the gut level person, and then there's the heartfelt person. And so under gut level, we have peacemakers, perfectionists, protectors. Under the head thinking, we have people who observe, people who question, people gather information. And then heart feeling, we have performers and romantics and helpers and supporters. So Enneagram suggests that there's quite a few emotions. One of the questions we can ask is, can you put on a mask of emotion? And another question is, can drama and acting be useful? And so asking Abby first, the first question, and then Martha, the second question, and then others welcome to put their hand up as well. Abby, can you put on a mask to hide your emotions or to show emotions? What are your thoughts when people try to do that?
I guess it just depends on your personality. Me as an example, I am not very good at hiding my emotions. What you see on my face is sort of how I'm feeling. Other people, it's the opposite. Some people look really like they're not happy, but actually it's just their face. Or other times people, smile too often, so then they're hard to read as well. So I guess it just depends on your personality, but definitely for me, I struggle to wear a mask. I can't. If I'm not happy, I will show you.
No, that's good. And I think it's good to be authentic and real. And that's why I think some in the ancient world liked the masks, and then others really didn't like them at all. Martha, your thoughts on the second question. Can drama and acting be helpful for students to improve their thinking, their understanding of emotions, of themselves, of issues? What are your thoughts, Martha, on that?
Look, absolutely. I think I know that in education support, when we're trying to help a child understand emotion and recognize emotion in themselves and other people, we use a lot of role play. So basically that's drama. It's getting them to put themselves into the position and I guess just to try and help with understanding. I think sometimes professional actors, this may be a bit bad in the fact that it goes the other way. It's too much. Like, I think they're just, in general, actors and people in entertainment are pretty messed up. And I think it might be because of how into their roles they get and into character they get. And I think there's something in that, but
yeah. So it's important to have a good amount of time to be authentic and real rather than just putting on these roles. But it's valuable to try different roles. And the same can happen in a journal. There is an argument that in order to develop healthy thinking, if you have an opportunity in journal writing to consider what people think. So let's say you've had a run-in with a student and a run-in with another teacher, and you go home and journal about it. You could write down, I had a run-in, I felt very angry. And then you can move on. The other teacher, call him Joe, he could have felt this. And if you write his position for a few sentences, helps you understand that. And the student could have felt. And if you write that for a few sentences, and then you can come back to yours, but nonetheless, I think I was right, or whatever. But that exercise of trying different viewpoints can be very, very helpful. In emotional research, the big question is, which comes first, the physiological arousal or your experience of the emotion? And the bird here is saying, I don't sing because I'm happy because I sing. And I guess a little bit the same. You go into a church service, you glum, you sing a few happy songs, and then have you chosen to be happy and sing the songs, or has singing the songs made you happy? What about Paige and Alira? Which comes first, your physiological experience, or do you make a decision and then the experience follows?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I think the second one is what you said. I think because I just think I don't know.
Sounds good. Alira, your thoughts, which comes first?
For me, definitely for me, it's when I see that person with the emotion. Like if you're crying, I'm crying with you. Because I am quite an emotional personality. So or if someone's angry, I'm angry with you, angry together. So I definitely, I think somewhere in between. Yes.
And it could be both. They could interact with one another. So common sense says that emotion arousing experience, like we're driving the car, we almost hit something, that stimulates a sense of fear, or someone pulls in front of us in traffic light, anger. And so that then triggers possibly the emotion or the physiological blood rushes to our head. Seeing an angry dog could trigger a feeling of fear, or seeing a shark or something like that. So certainly emotions are whole body, whole organism. That is, you feel them, they get into your bloodstream, you then want to express yourself, and then you think about them. And so understanding the speed there. Probably the slowest is the conscious thinking that happens in the forefront of the brain. And then the first thing that happens is either the feeling or the physiological. So there are theories on emotion. And one of the thinkers back in the early 1900s, William James, on this matter, believed that it's the physiological that often comes first. And so car pulls in front of you, you feel fear or anger, and you've got to be able to react very quickly. And that's what William James is saying, is that William James is saying the physiological kicks in very quickly. So your hand touches a hot stove, physiologically you pull back, and then next you have the emotion comes anger. I shouldn't have touched that hot stove. And then thirdly, let's think this through. If I leave my hand on the hot stove, I'm going to be in a lot of pain. So it's the thinking through that is slower of the three responses. And then Carl Lange, about the same time, a Danish physiologist, his theory, similar to William James' theory, was that the physiological response comes first, followed by the feeling, and then thirdly, thinking. And so we could even add here a way of describing that. So 3 steps in our body. One is the physiological. Car nearly hits us, and then the physiological, James and Langer are saying physiological. They're saying that kicks in first. That is the blood rush, the heart beat faster, sweat. All of these things happen first. And then we have the feeling. So from a baby of 1-year-old, 2-year-old, we've learned that when we get almost hit by a car, we should have a feeling of fear, a feeling of anger, a feeling of relief. And so these early psychologists are saying that these are the responses that come in second. And then third, we have thoughts that take longer to happen. And evolutionists call these 3 levels of the brain: mammalian brain, reptilian brain, and human brain there. And there would be other ways of explaining that more from a creation perspective. So the James Lange theory is saying you see the oncoming car, your heart pounds, and then you have the emotion, and then you think about it. And so that's different to the common sense, which says we have the emotion first. So that's worth considering. Now, that has implications for us in the classroom, in that if a student drops a book and lands on our toe, the physiological thing will be, we'll feel the blood rush, the heartbeats, etc. first, and then we'll have this welling up. I am so angry with that student. They're always dropping books on my toes. And then we'll have the thinking about it. And what we as teachers need to recognize is that we need to allow time for the thinking. So we might say, you stay there. I've just got to think this through. I'm not going to give you any more books. And if I do, you can't lift them more than an inch off the floor. And so what we can do by understanding this flow of steps, we can respond in better ways. Or if one student keeps getting annoyed by another student, we can realize there's going to be physiological responses that are going to be triggered. And so one might be a shy student, one might be a bullying student. And so there's going to be physiology taking place. And so we've got to realize they're going to need time and strategies to respond to the physiological. And you're always going to have students poking one another, aren't you? Even if they're young or in year 12, perhaps. And then we have to realize that the feelings are not going to be fully understood. They're going to kick in, the blood is going to rush. And then this is a teaching moment. We need to teach this year 12 student, don't keep poking that other one, even though they're a beautiful person that you want to get the attention of or something. Leave that to outside classroom or something. And then the important thing for us to also realize is that there is a holistic engagement of all of these parts of the brain that need to be considered, and teaching moments can be opportunities where we can consider all of these. Also, as Christians, we can encourage people to bring in love and kindness and forgiveness for one another. One important thing that I found helpful was you are not your emotions. And so if a student seems to be saying, and you say, what's going on here? And the student says, I am angry. I think it's important to realize that that student is not angry. That is, what they really should be saying is that they feel angry. And what they should be saying is that there is blood rushing in my body, heart beating in my chest, hormones moving through my bloodstream that are triggering a feeling, and that the feelings are like dials in a car. That is, these dials move and the dials are flashing orange lights saying, time to feel angry. This is the 5th time the student next to you has poked you. And so rather than saying I am angry, it is much better to say I feel angry, because it is a dial going off that is telling me that there is something to pay attention to. And the same with fear. So when you're rock climbing a 1,000-foot rock wall, remind yourself, I am, I've got a rope on, but my brain, when I look down, triggers, you're about to die. But this is just a little, trigger there. Have you ever noted that evangelism is easy when you've got people 1,000 feet off the ground doing rock climbing or something like that? So emotion, rather than saying I am angry, we should say I feel angry. So James Lange's theory is that perception of a stimulus leads to a physiological response first, and you can't necessarily change all that. That leads to a feeling, because our body has learned over the 20 or so years of our lives that we need to respond. And so we develop this concept of a feeling, and then thought takes a while. And it's the thought that we then program into our mind. So a car racing person will develop thoughts that they develop habits in, so that they don't fear as they charge into a sharp corner at high speed. So without bodily states followed on by feelings, perceptions, then we would just have these bodily states. That is our heartbeat, etc. So it's feelings that develop. And they tested this by talking with people, and then they recognized that it's the bodily reactions come first. Another theory by Philip Bard says that you have the arousal and that they come together. So that is another way of understanding that the two come together. Schachter also developed the two-factor. His theory says that they, physiological and cognitive, all of it rushes in together. So that's another way of understanding this. The arousal response can spill over as well into other, and so one person gets angry, spills over, everyone gets angry, and then you get, interesting, you go home and your friend, you get angry at them. And that's a spillover effect, isn't it? You shouldn't be, and so you've got to be aware of these other things that the body can do. And Robert St. John, American psychologist, he concluded that some emotional reactions we just don't think about because we're not aware, they're subconscious. And so he believed that things can be subconscious. Certainly we know that we see something with our eyes, it skips along to the immediate registering in the brain, which triggers heart, blood, get ready, you got a fight or flight, and then that then goes to emotions next, and then finally thought in the front of the brain comes next. Lazarus too, another American psychologist, he said a lot of our emotion is unconscious, and one of the very helpful things you can do is to make it conscious. So if you've got two students who are annoyed with one another because they keep poking one another, if you can start to get them to express and lay out on the table, why do you feel that way? What is it that you feel? The more they can lay out on the table, the longer they take, the better it'll be. So we've got two types of system in our body, one that we've got very little control over. It's the autonomic nervous system that just kicks in. And then we have the other type, which we have more control over. Interestingly, the more peripheral system out here, hand on a hot stove, kicks in, bing, automatically, your hand is burning away, move it quickly, and then very arousal, bing. And the same system, someone treads on your toe, you might turn around, pop them on the nose. And we'll ask Karen in a moment if that's the appropriate thing to do. And then, however, there is this central system that we have where we work things through, and that takes longer. And the calming system takes longer. And so if we're facing an annoying situation and we're thinking, I'm not going to react, this person's provoked me, I'm going to think nice, quiet thoughts, that takes longer, the calming mechanism. So it's good to be aware of this. And then, of course, if someone pulls a gun on you, fight or flight. So here's a person trying the fight or flight response. That kicks in fairly quickly. So hopefully that is a useful way of understanding. So when a dog barks at you, something happens, your pupils dilate, and so they open up, need as much light as possible, breathe in, need as much oxygen as possible, heart beats, boom, 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 need as much blood as possible. So all of that's the automatic system. And that'll happen when someone else, annoys you, takes your car park spot or something like that. And you think, dreadful, what's happened? And then you're going to have less saliva, so you get a dry mouth. You're going to have lots of sweating. You're going to have increased breathing, and then your heart's going to accelerate, and your digestion's going to shut down, and then the hormones are going to be released. Panic, panic, panic. Yeah. Someone has stolen your car park space. React very quickly. Jump out, smash their windows. Whatever's appropriate. And however, if you're a Christian person with the calming effect, you think, and I'll ask Gabriella in a moment, what chorus do we sing or what do we think of to feel calm? And then, and you find that the saliva comes back, your skin goes dry, decreased, slow heart, digestion comes back in, all is happy, and have my parking spot. I'm a Christian, or a Buddhist, or whatever there, etc. So can I get everyone to write down what's something that stood out in this first half hour, 3/4 hour, as we've talked about some of the ways in which the body responds emotionally. We began by saying that we have a choice as to whether we are going to respond using emotion and reason. Many of the students here today have said ideally they would like to respond with reason. So rather than react within 30 seconds, they would take a bit more time to think through what has happened, what's the decision, etc. And then more recently, we've gone over and looked at William James and other theories that we can have either a rapid response, which is going to be the body and the feeling responding. And then we're saying we're not our feelings, that if we think it through, we can realize we are a particular person. And you might be able to think of an example of that as well. So if we start with Martha, Alira, Paige, and Abby as 4 people who can give us their thoughts on what stood out in this first look here. Martha.
So for me, probably just, the relationship between emotion and reason, and just, I guess, how they work together, but you need the good balance of both. And that one isn't, despite what the world seems to think, one isn't more important than the other.
I like that. And can you give us an example or so of the importance of this balance? And we see it certainly in music drama, in working with students who are struggling, those sorts of things. What's an example of helping with the balance, Martha?
I think even just in everyday life, just having social intelligence, like being able to empathize with other people and understand where other people are coming from, that takes an emotional response. That isn't just a logical thing. You're not going to be able to show emotion and show empathy if you don't have emotions.
Yes, so good. Yeah. And then down to Alira.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool just mapping out the different reactions that emotional responses and logical responses have in sudden situations or passionate situations, like, oh my goodness, I nearly crushed that person, in the car, or oh my goodness, I nearly ran a child over, so, I was walking, just how different taking a calmer approach and taking a drastic approach.
And I like that calming approach. It's so important for us, and it's also important for our students to learn. And we may teach our students some breathing exercises, calming exercises. We could Google some and help them with that. But one of the things that I've found helpful is, when do you open your emails? So some emails, I don't open them the first hour of the day, and I don't open them in the last hour or so of the day, because whatever you open in the last hour of the day, you take home. And whatever you open in the first hour of the day when you're just waking up, you're still getting used to the day, and you don't want to open it up and it says, this parent has complained, or whatever. So, there's a thought. Paige, what stood out to you?
It's funny because we didn't really talk about it too much. It was just like one slide, but I saw it and I took notes on it because I found it so interesting. It was the spillover effect, because I think that's one that I was like, okay, I can relate to that, because if something happened to me during the day and I go home and tell my family about it, it's almost like everything that I felt in that moment all of a sudden comes back. And then that's when my family tell me to calm down and and things like that. So so it's almost like the venting spillover thing.
Yes, and that's why they have Lifeline. Maybe they should encourage us teachers to ring up Lifeline once every few months or something, because you actually have, it's a vent line, isn't it? And you can say to the person on the Lifeline phone, I had such a tough day today, and this student, they are always getting into trouble. So certainly that venting effect. And I know this is a real challenge for our family members. because our family members find that if it's every day we're venting, they find that's a bit too much. Yeah, Abby, your thoughts?
I had a few notes written down as well, just reflecting on this session.
Yeah.
Similar to what Alira said, learning about the ways in which our body responds. And I liked seeing how, I forget what the first column was, but to the, like the different parts of our body, and then the calming effect and what happens vice like the, I guess the more positive response would be a more calming approach to things. Yes. And learning the importance of taking a step back and to really think about, you know, having a logical approach to some things sometimes, because I tend to be emotional, like I said at the start, and I tend to respond with emotion initially. So I think learning the importance of just taking a step back. Yes, that's the one. Yes. The one that you have open. Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. And then before, when we were talking from Alira, an example came in my head of, in our class in particular, we have smart brain, where if we have a 3-hour period and the kids are getting all crazy and they're starting to get really frustrated, we'd stop and they have to put their hands here and just sort of rub their brain, and they have to hold their chest and take a few deep breaths. So I think that's something I need to incorporate in my personal life as well before I respond with emotion, as I usually do.
And that can be very important classroom strategies. I know some schools where they'll have a first 10 minutes can be more calming activities. We're going to take this time to diary write. We're going to take this time to read something. It can be a time of quiet reflection. We might put up a Bible verse or put a passage up by a great thinker and say, and if they've been running around outside or running around, you don't want them bringing all that energy into the class. So having these calming times or calming practices in the classroom can be very important, and there can be other strategies. Gabriella, can you think of some things that you could do, some practices that would help in the classroom? What would be some classroom practices that would help bring some peace to a group of fiery students? Yes.
Yeah. I recently, actually, like you mentioned the writing task, I read somewhere a teacher that she has a year 6 class, and what she does at the beginning of the day is they have a journal prompt, and they write it out, and it can be however long it wants to be. And it's just that they come into the class, they get out whatever's either happened in the morning or the night, and they can just get it out, and that way they're starting the day fresh, which I think can be used anytime in the day, just as that, okay, let's get it out onto paper, let's mentally reset and start fresh. So I think that's handy, practical.
Yeah, that sounds good. Alex, what are your thoughts in teaching or in the classroom? How do we apply what we've learned here in this class, Alex?
I actually really like the Bible verse that you shared, Proverbs 16:32.
Yeah.
That patience is better than power. I think that is a great way to approach our emotions, as it just teaches us that holding back is important, especially when we're dealing with students.
Yeah, and so we've got teachers that hold back and students that hold back, and then there are teachable moments. And so if, and you might have 2 students rather than in front of the class, you might say, look, let's think through what were some of the triggers here. And, if we studied this further, there could be physiological triggers, there could be other things going in our minds, and what we think. An interesting exercise is your thoughts affect you. This is called CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy. And in this approach, what you sense, your senses aren't totally real, and you can choose your viewpoint, and you can choose what's going on. And the example I heard was that if a bus comes along and there's 9 people at the bus stop, and the bus driver sees that there are 9 people, and he knows that he's in a hurry and that'll take a long time to load 9 people on the bus. So he drives straight past. Now we have the event, but cognitive behavior therapy says that we have your perception and you have your decision and your choice about what you think of. And one of those 9 people, I mean, if it's me, I might be annoyed. But if it's one of those 9 people, they could be sitting next to someone and they could say, wow, I've now got an extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour to chat to the person next to me. Isn't that wonderful? And they can put a smile on and enjoy it. And other people could have other thoughts. You know, this is time to enjoy the music I'm listening to, etc. But the important thing here is that how you see things is a decision that you make. And I think that's true when another teacher's annoying, when another student's annoying. We make a decision as how we see things and we send that into our minds. We say, you know, that student's annoyed me, but I'm going to make a decision now how I think about that. And it's not easy because there are parts of our mind that'll want to replay like a CD that plays the same song over and over again. Particularly if you've been defeated in life a little bit by your brothers and sisters, then that song will come back. Nobody likes me, everybody, you know, etc. But you've got to be careful that you don't play that song over and over again and get you into trouble. Kieran, what stood out to you? What could we apply? What have we learned?
Yeah, really just sort of just those methods of processing our own emotions. Yeah. And just being able to provide those safe spaces in those times where we're just like we're not taking things home with us after like looking at things in the last hour of work day, or we're not just like completely giving ourselves like the worst start to the day by opening things in the first hour, that when we're not quite there yet and we're not able to properly control the way we feel, the way we talk, the way we act, and just when we get right stuck into it, just having those methods of controlling your emotions and processing the way you feel and processing your thoughts are really just effective ways to just make it, there's small things that make a big difference in how the rest of the day will play out.
Yeah, so good. They're important points. The other thing to remember too is that in terms of emotions and thinking, be careful that emotions should not drive your thinking. And so if you're making a decision, and in teaching, you might decide, you know, you've got 6 hours of teaching to go. And if you find that 3 or 4 students annoy you, you think, we're going to do maths for the next 6 hours, you know. And you've not thought that through really, have you? If you're acting out of your emotions. Whereas if you can put those emotions of annoyance to one side and say, no, we'll go ahead with our plan, do the maths for 1 hour, and then we'll move on, and we'll do the fun activity, etc., even though you're all annoying me. And so it's important that emotions don't drive our thinking, and that they don't drive our critical thinking. And so when we've got to think critically. But at the same time, I think it's important not to ignore our emotions, and it's worth journaling and writing down. These students have annoyed me. Some of the ways they have annoyed me are, and journaling is one way to do it. Another way is to put on nice, soothing music. They do that in shopping centres when they want you to stay there for a long time. You know, a bit of nice, slow, classical music. So you walk through the aisles slowly and fill your shopping baskets, etc. So you can have some nice music in your classroom there. I suggest not playing too much up-tempo music by the Wiggles or something, and getting them all stirred up unless you want that response. Let's take a break there then, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and look further at emotions, thinking, and critical thinking in today's class. Thank you.